I guess we're around about time. My name is Ryan Fasan, technical consultant here at Tile of Spain. I want to thank everybody for coming to the Spanish Pavilion. Encourage you to walk around, talk to the Spanish manufacturers. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes on how I think sustainability is moving and maybe not moving fast enough, and how we as a tile industry can get deeper involved in the sustainability question and conversation when it comes to sustainable development. So we're going to go through 4 simple steps. We're going to look at sort of what the background is on sustainable design and development, why we as the construction industry really are the fulcrum that's going to push the needle on environmental development and thought process, and how we have that power, why it's time to really sort of put the pedal to the metal and reset our thought process and reframe the path forward. And it's really kind of interesting to me that sustainable design still remains a subcategory of design as a whole. Now, I want to say at the beginning that a lot of the pictures, a lot of the quotes, and a lot of the books that I'm suggesting as deep dives came directly from a guy who I find highly inspirational. His name's Tim Ferriss. He's done a bunch of different books and a bunch of different podcasts, one of them being with this guy, Jocko Willink, who happens to be a decorated Navy SEALs commander and trainer. This guy is someone that I keep in my pocket each and every day, because I think all of us need an accountability partner, and I find it incredibly difficult to look in that guy's eyes and explain why something's not my fault. He's one of the most accountable people in the world. He's got a book called Extreme Ownership. He's got a TED Talk by the same name. And I keep this guy in my pocket to keep me humble, to keep me from explaining why something's not my fault, why it's not the biggest issue, and why it's up to someone else to do something. And I wanted to start the program with that, because I think that as we look at the history of sustainable design, we start to realize how much we need to make that more our responsibility. It's something that I took to heart over the past year. I've started a new construction company, and we're kind of rethinking how construction is being done. We're doing everything from demolition all the way through to finished work. The only thing that we subcontract is plumbing at this point, because the way construction is working right now is not living up to its potential in terms of sustainability. Thinking back to the computer simulation that started in 1972 by the Club of Rome, predicting complete economic and societal collapse just 8 years before I was born. That was the first time sustainable development really was defined in modern building practices. Throughout the years, we've made a lot of steps and made a lot of headway that's doing a lot of good in that realm. But if we understand that within my children's lifetime, we're staring down the barrel of complete collapse if we don't make faster change. So that's what today's kind of presentation is all about. It's not necessarily about answers, it's about asking the right questions. It's about taking ownership for what we can do to push the needle in the right direction. So this slide kind of hits home for me, because all 4 of these things happened in the Pacific Northwest. All 4 of these, the heat dome, where we're experiencing high humidity and extremely high temperatures for extended periods, is something that can cause a cataclysmic effect. The atmospheric river happened actually the day before I flew, and we got 1 entire month of rain in hours in Vancouver. And if we don't think that the way that we're living our lives and building our buildings to support them is contributing to these effects, we're kidding ourselves. So say what you will about Pope John Paul II, but I loved this quote, and I think it's infinitely true today, is that we're never going to solve the environmental problem, the ecological problem, unless we take a serious look at our lifestyle. And that includes us in the construction industry, because I really think that the questions we need to ask are telling us that we are the tipping point. This was incredibly interesting, coming from the global construction perspectives in an Oxford economic study, that if you look at construction revenue, in the next 18 years, we're looking at $15.5 trillion in revenue in the construction industry. By the year 2030, that's going to outstrip the growth of global GDP. That means that construction industry is the most profitable industry of anything we do in humanity. In the next 8 years, we're looking to build 36 million housing projects in the top 20 most populated cities in the world. So any little change that we make in this industry has a huge impact on the ecological bottom line and our accountability with our planet. So we think, well, that's got to be making changes in how we're perceiving the value of sustainable development. But the data is showing that it isn't. Things like renewable energy and water conservation on site are actually declining in clients' priorities over the past couple of years. But there's a disconnect because things like utility costs are extremely important to people. How do we think we're going to get there without having renewable energy on site is beyond me. Especially when we're in a state like we are right now, where we've got an unprecedented real estate boom here in the US, where we've got a lack of affordable stock, where housing prices have grown more over the past 12 months in the US than they have in the country's history. So the affordable stock is something that we really need to focus on, and that's historically, and based on client values, it's something that people don't see that return on investment. We need to change the dollars and cents value story on sustainability. Same thing in commercial client values. We're seeing that things like renewable energy and on-site water reclamation are low priorities and actually decreasing in priority for commercial clients, even though brand recognition and sustainable practices for brands is an understandable cost of doing business. And yet there's that disconnect again. Something like indoor air quality and utility costs being so high on their value list, but none of the quote-unquote sustainable practices being valued anywhere near as much. So these year-over-year values remain fairly consistent between both commercial and residential, and yet it's not connecting the dots. People aren't understanding what they can do to build more sustainable buildings. They're not seeing that return on investment. What we need to do is make more personal connections that have relevant connections to their context and their lifestyle, and create that cost versus return equation to be a profitable one for clients. Now, even though this is not Albert Einstein, even though it's always quoted as being him, it still remains a very valid quote, and that we can't expect to get different results doing the same thing over and over again. Since 1972, it hasn't worked so far to make sustainable design just the standard for design. It can't be a subset anymore. And what it comes to is figuring out how to work incentives properly. I put Dr. John A. List up here as a deep dive, and his paper, The Y-Axis, that he did as a deep dive, because he's a master of incentivization. He's worked with all sorts of private institutions and governments as well to look at things like loss aversion bias and how the clawback incentive can work to get people to buy into things that they don't see the value in right now. That's what we need to do as an industry, and push our associations, our industry associations, to work with national and international standards associations and codes that then put leverage on the government to create this incentivization thing to cause this reset and actually foster positive change so that sustainable design doesn't become a subset of design and development. Here's another guy that I find incredibly inspiring. It's probably one of the most Renaissance men of today, Robert Rodriguez. He's a filmmaker. He owns his own TV studio. He brings painters and sculptors on set to work with his actors. He does everything on a shoestring, and he does incredibly well at what he does because he doesn't label himself as any of those things. He labels himself as a creative. And it's by being a creative person that he goes the opposite direction and finds new territory and new ways. When he was shooting Machete, He got some of the biggest stars in the industry to do it for almost free, because he said, look, you can be on your next project and you can be shooting it for 2 months. You're going to come on my show. I'm going to shoot you on and off this movie in 4 days. It's going to be incredible. You're going to be so free. And he started with why. He started telling them what they were going to get out of it. And it's how he's done everything that he's done. And I think that's something and a mindset that we need to embrace in terms of how we reshape the thought process in sustainable design. Now, we can get experts on processes, on systems and materials together and get them together with creatives to start discovering this new territory, working with our governments and associations so that we recreate and reframe the discussion around sustainable development and get to redefine the term itself. So I want to give you a couple of questions that I ask with my crew when we're trying to figure out how we can build better, how we can do more sustainable projects and actually increase the budget for our clients so it doesn't cost them more and the return on the investment is so much better. So what we started doing is tolerance or transparency meetings with any of the sub-trades so that we knew that each sub-trade knew what the cost was in materials and in time and in labor if the trade that was coming in before them did an inferior job that didn't live up to their tolerances. How would it impact budgets? And this has been a huge one for us. If we do our flooring before we do our boarding, it actually decreases the cost of our flooring installation and the time frame by about 20 to 30% for most of our clients, which saves them all kinds of money to put those renewable energy practices in place on their sites. How can we optimize energy efficiency if we use the thermal mass of things like tile as a heat sink for passive solar gain? These are all questions of how to make sustainability less expensive, more approachable, and have more value, for our clients. So I talked about thermal mass and conductivity. Can we look at substrates and structural details and materials to minimize their cost so that we have more value to add in things like insulation and thermal bridging and creating higher performance buildings that don't actually cost more? Are there opportunities for new salvage and reuse if we do our demolition in different ways so that we're not sending 50% of the US-based landfill burden from the construction industry? How can we use modular and off-site builds to look at the interplay between materials and do less wastage on site so that we can actually harvest and recapture what we're utilizing in our buildings today? Are there even low-tech solutions based in indigenous architectural practices that actually optimize their climate, the materials that they have around that actually don't cost more money, that we've neglected because we haven't had those conversations? Because in the end, we know that all of these things apply in ceramic tile. That ceramic tile truly is the answer when it comes to materials for the most sustainable practices. That it optimizes safety, durability, livability, and our budgets just by using something that we only have to do once. So I wanted to highlight a couple of really interesting resources that have a lot of discussion on sustainability. Of course, tilespain.usa.com with the entire sustainable page with videos, articles, and studies, as well as TCNA's Why Tile initiative. There's also a really neat program that's now free. It used to cost a lot of money to look at building science and embodied energy and things like that. That's sponsored by the US government called Bees Online. And then there's a really neat initiative that's a partner initiative between the UN and UNESCO that's partnering with research universities around the world. This is just one from my home nation, Canada, where they're partnering with indigenous cultures to, again, harvest that ancestral knowledge, to learn how they lived in harmony for thousands of years when we've destroyed it in mere hundreds. So there's all sorts of ways that we can reframe our thought processes, and this is one that I really want to challenge everyone to think of. Because I hear this, and I think most people say it now by rote, because it's no longer true. I hear so many design professionals and architects say, I hate foam. I'm not using anything that looks like something else. If I want a wood, I'm going to use the real wood. If I want a marble, I'm going to use the real marble. That doesn't have to be the case anymore today. I challenge you to walk around and look at the marbles and look at the woods, and more importantly, touch them. And tell me that they aren't as authentic as the natural material. The thing that drives me absolutely crazy is that most time this is coming out of the mouth of someone that's putting an engineered or natural hardwood in a kitchen for a family that cooks all the time and has 3 dogs. When it's not going to last for that installation, that's when you use a material that faithfully reproduces something else like ceramics. It's why 60 years from now, we're staring down the barrel of complete social and economic collapse by that prediction. Now, I love this one because we found, I think all of us found our connection with this over the past 2 years, that if we weren't exposed to nature, if we weren't around growing things, that our empathy, our sense of caring for our fellow humans started to dwindle as well. And so that's really sort of the end of the story, is that we need to get out of our using synthetics, that we need to take a more holistic approach to how we're thinking about materials and how they integrate with systems, and take a systemic approach to our materials as well. Look at how we can prefab and take stuff off-site so that waste isn't such an issue, and we can reincorporate that waste into our production stream for our buildings as well. So I hope I've given you some questions to ask, some thoughts to reframe, and how we can reconstruct sustainable development moving forward and lead it as the tile industry. So, thank you.